Thank you very much for that introduction. Let me start by saying that it's a great honor and privilege to be here at RIGSS, the Royal Institute of Governance and Strategic Studies in Funchalik. I know and we are all aware that this is a special initiative. Establishing RIGSS was a special initiative of His Majesty, the King of Bhutan, and therefore it is a great honor to be here, especially to be able to address this Friday Forum, the 9th Friday Forum as we just heard, and also the Executive Leadership Program which is currently on here at RIGSS. As you heard from the introduction, I've spent many years before I came here to Thimphu dealing with East Asia out of Delhi, and therefore talking on India's Act East policy is a natural for me. It's something which I thought I should do. But in the course of my talk, I'll also touch on other aspects of India's foreign policy. And I've requested that I'll speak for about 40 or 45 minutes. And thereafter, I would welcome questions from the floor. Whenever I've done this in other parts of Bhutan, there will be an endless number of questions. So I expect that from this august audience also. So let me start by saying that even as I speak, the Prime Minister of India, Mr. Narendra Modi, is on a foreign tour where he has just finished visits to Mauritius, Seychelles, and is currently in Sri Lanka. But let me start by talking about the fact that India's Act East policy is something which is, for a country, it's something which is relatively recent. It's relatively of recent origin, and we'll talk a little bit more about this. I just thought I'd start with two photographs from recent visits out and in by the Prime Minister. The first one was, of course, for the 12th ASEAN-India Summit, which took place at Naypyidaw in Myanmar on the 12th of November 2014. And this particular photograph is that of a visit in September of last year to Delhi by the President of China and, of course, his gracious wife. But talking about the Act East policy, let me start with recent outgoing visits by the Prime Minister of India. In early September of last year, which is very soon after he took over in the end of May, he visited Japan. Then later in November, he visited Myanmar, Australia and Fiji. Right now, of course, as we spoke, as I said earlier, he's on a visit to Seychelles, Mauritius and Sri Lanka. He's currently in Sri Lanka right now. And if you look at where our Foreign Minister, the Indian External Affairs Minister, the EAM in this slide, has been to recently, you'll see that she's been to the Republic of Korea or South Korea at the very end of December of last year. And then earlier this year, she's been to China. Let me move on to my next slide, which is incoming visits. And if you see over the last few months that this particular government of India has been in office since late May 2014, we've had visits by the Prime Minister of Australia in September of 2014, the President of China in September 2014, and you saw a photograph which I had put up earlier of that visit by the President of China to India. That particular photograph was taken during his official welcome at Rashtrapati Bhavan in New Delhi. The Prime Minister of Vietnam visited us in October, the Vice President of Myanmar in January, and more recently, a few weeks ago, we had the President of Singapore in India. Now, the point I'm trying to make here is that India's interaction with countries which lie to the east of India is very, very vibrant, is very intense, and is very frequent. And all this is because we have what we call a Look East, what used to be called a Look East, which is now called an Act East policy. Is there a difference between Look East and Act East? What I would think, because I've been a participant in government of India, both in the phase of Look East and Act East, I would say that this is a natural progression of a particular policy. And whether you call it Look East or Act East is not really that important. What is important is the fact that India is looking eastwards and not just towards the west to Europe and North America, but has increasingly been turning and looking eastwards. that is to all the countries which geographically lie to the east of India. And let me also put this in the context of Bhutan, that I would think that Bhutan also is very broadly towards the east of India. It's contiguous with West Bengal and Assam, just south of the gate here. And therefore, I would even go so far as to say that Bhutan is also a part of India's Look East policy, even though our relationship with India, India's relationship with Bhutan is something which is age-old, which is several decades old, and the close ties that we have between our two countries is something which far precedes or outdates the Look East policy that we have been following. A few facts. The Look East policy itself was announced in 1992, and I want to give you some background about the Look East policy. It was in the middle of 1991 that India had a general election where the Congress party was voted to power. But you would remember that it was in that general election that the previous Prime Minister of India, Mr. Rajiv Gandhi, was assassinated. So when the Congress party won power in 1991, it was Mr. P.V. Narasimha Rao who became the Prime Minister of India. And simultaneously with that election, almost as the election was taking place, we had a huge foreign exchange, a domestic crisis. We had a foreign exchange crisis. We found that we had foreign exchange for the import of just 2 months of our requirements, our necessities. And as a result of this, what happened within India when Prime Minister Narasimha Rao took over, he appointed Dr. Manmohan Singh as his finance minister, and the two of them then embarked on what is called they embarked on the new economic policy, which stressed foreign investment and foreign trade. Till then, India was relatively autarkic. We did not stress foreign investment and foreign trade. We thought that economic growth would come largely due to our own internal domestic growth, due to our own internal domestic market. But in 1991, when we faced this huge foreign exchange crisis, it became necessary, as a result of our experience then, to change our economic orientation, to change our economic policies. And obviously, when we looked around the world, we saw that many of the East Asian economies, whether they were the then so-called tiger economies of South Korea, of Taiwan, of Singapore, of Hong Kong, many of them had grown through foreign investment and foreign trade, by expanding foreign investment and foreign trade. And one of the things our government did at that time was to make it easier to invite foreign investment, attract foreign investment, and to enter into trade. But the main objective and the main focus of the economic policies, or the then new economic policies which the government of India followed, was to make it easier to do business in India and to ease out the business environment. The ease of doing business was focused on, and there was a dismantling of what used to be called the license Raj. So it was generally made easier to do business in India, to trade, to invest, and there was a dismantling of the license Raj. So this was what was happening domestically within India in the second half of 1991 and throughout 1992 and 93. And when we looked around the world, as I said earlier, we saw that there were certain economies in East Asia. There had been Japan before that. There were the tiger economies of the 70s and 80s. And by the early 1990s, China was also on the path of economic development and growth, with focus on the external sector, with focus on expanding foreign trade and attracting greater foreign investment. And therefore, as we looked around the world, we thought that it is important to follow this kind of model. Though, of course, we did not focus exclusively on that. We also realized that expanding the domestic market was important. And we did pay a lot of importance, not just to foreign trade and foreign investment, but also to the size of the domestic market and domestic economic growth. And as I said earlier, East and Southeast Asia was then, even in the early 1990s, and it's true even today, it was the most dynamic part of the world economy. And what we felt was that we have to hold on to the coattails of East Asia or Southeast Asia, and as East and Southeast Asia expand and grow, if we are able to hold on to their coattails, we'll also be pulled along with them, and that we will also grow. And this was the genesis of the Look East policy of 1992. The point I'm trying to make here is that it was an outworking of our domestic requirements, of our domestic needs, of our domestic necessities. And this particular Act East, Look East policy, as it used to be called earlier, was necessitated because of our domestic requirements and was dictated by India's domestic environment in the early 1990s. So this foreign policy initiative was entirely based on our domestic needs and our domestic requirements. Let me go to some of the main pillars of our Look East policy, or our Act East policy as we are now calling it. ASEAN, first a 6-member grouping, now a 10th-member grouping, is the core of our Look East policy. And the reason for this is also very simple, because India has traditionally, historically had very strong linkages with certain parts of Southeast Asia. Definitely Malaysia, definitely Indonesia, definitely Singapore, Vietnam, Cambodia, where you have Hindu temples even today. So we have had a very strong linkage historically and over centuries, civilizational linkage as people call it, with ASEAN. And therefore ASEAN, the 10-member ASEAN grouping, the 10 countries of ASEAN, is the core of our Look East policy, of our Act East policy. And we believe that developments in Asia Pacific should be led by the ASEAN grouping, and this is something which ASEAN themselves feel is important for the Asia Pacific. And we are happy with that kind of leadership role for ASEAN. So what's happened between India and ASEAN? And I look at all the 10 countries as a group. I don't want to go into individual countries unless it helps me to make the points that I'm making. So look at trade between India and ASEAN. It was a few $100 million in 1992, but by 2013 it had grown to $76 billion two-way trade between the 10 ASEAN nations and India. In 2013 was $76 billion. And in fact, ASEAN is one of our largest trade partners today. Even though India itself is not a very large trading nation, even in 2014, 2015, a large proportion of our trade is with the 10 ASEAN countries, and we have a target of $100 billion by 2015. And more recently, we have sort of set ourselves an even higher goal and a higher target of bilateral trade with the 10 ASEAN countries of $200 billion by 2022. And within the group of 10 ASEAN countries, the main trading partners are, as I said earlier, Malaysia, Singapore, Indonesia. These are our main trading partners, and that's where the bulk of this trade happens. Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos are also important to us, but the volume of trade is growing slowly but steadily. Look at investments. The figures that I am showing here are more recent, so I don't go back to 1992, but if you trace it back to 1992, there was very little investment between India and the ASEAN 10, but in the period 2007 to 14, so in that 7-year gap or 7-year period, Indian investment into the 10 ASEAN countries was to the tune of $31 billion, and ASEAN investment into India was $25 billion. Now, investment is important, as all of you who are students of economics know, because it also leads to expanded trade. So cross-investments are important because it leads to expanded trade between countries. And this volume of about $50 billion of cross-investments in a 7-year period, 2007 to 14, shows what is happening between India and ASEAN. Some of you may rightly point out that Indian investment into ASEAN is $31 billion and in the reverse direction $25 billion. So there's a net outflow of resources from India. But we don't look at it entirely that way, because we feel that ASEAN investment into India is in cutting-edge areas, and we are learning not just from ASEAN companies, from companies from Southeast Asia, but we are also getting technology from them. And of course, Indian investment into the ASEAN 10 is important. as I said, because it enhances exchanges and interaction between the two countries. There's one, I don't want to throw too many statistics at you because that's always negative, but there's one statistic which I always use, and that's the last point which I make here, that if you look at the number of flights, that is air connections, air connectivities between Singapore and different cities in India, in 1992 this was less than 10 flights a week from the island state or the city of Singapore and different parts of India, different cities of India. By 2013, this had increased to 300 flights a week. So it encapsulates or gives you an idea of the kind of interaction that is taking place, whether it is in business, whether it is through tourism, whether it is in any other area, whether it's people-to-people exchanges between just Singapore and India. And this story is multiplied and is true of other ASEAN countries like Malaysia, Indonesia, and Vietnam and others. So this is a statistic which I think encapsulates or captures the spirit of what's been happening between India and ASEAN between 1992 and 2015, which is in a period of about 23 years. So ASEAN is the core of our Look East, Act East policy, and as I've just tried to point out to all of you, the interaction between India and ASEAN has been steadily strengthening, has been steadily growing, and is pretty intense right now. I'd just like to trace a bit of the history of how India-ASEAN interaction has happened over the years, especially with ASEAN as a group. It's one of the most successful groupings, like perhaps the European Union. It's one of the most successful groupings of countries in human history. So I thought I'd like to trace what exactly happened between our two countries. So in 1992, when we announced our Look East, or what is now called the Act East policy, India became a dialogue partner of ASEAN. So this was the first step, this was the first rudimentary step which we took, that we became one of several dialogue partners with ASEAN. 10 years later, in 2002, we became a full partner with ASEAN, and what I mean by a full partner is that we started having an annual ASEAN plus India interaction, and that's why, if you remember, I showed the first photograph of Prime Minister Modi last November at Naypyidaw in Myanmar, where he was meeting with all the leaders, the heads of state, head of government of the 10 ASEAN countries. That was the India-ASEAN summit of 2014 in November last year. But these individual summits started in 2002 when India became an ASEAN Plus partner. And then in 2012, we had the 10th anniversary of the ASEAN Plus India partnership and the 20th anniversary of the Dialogue partnership, and we celebrated this on a big scale in New Delhi. There were several things that we did. We had an ASEAN-India car rally, where you had several people who participated from all the ASEAN countries, and they came all the way to Calcutta in India by road. And then, of course, we had a summit meeting in Delhi where several of the heads of state, head of government from the ASEAN countries, all 10 of them, came to Delhi and we celebrated this anniversary. So, at a holistic level, that is, with ASEAN as a group, what have we been doing and what has happened? So, which is my next bullet point, is that we have a free trade agreement between India and ASEAN. The free trade agreement in goods was signed in 2009 and implemented from January 2010. We had a little more difficulty in negotiating our FTA in services and investment, because when you look at trade in goods, it's a very small portion or a small part of a larger free trade agreement, which should include trading services, investment, movement of natural persons, and so on and so forth. So we had a little bit of difficulty in our free trade agreement, in negotiating our free trade agreement in services and investment, but we finally got that done in 2014, and it is going to be implemented very soon, sometime by the middle of this year. So we have a free trade agreement in goods, services, investment, movement of natural persons with ASEAN, and we believe that our trade and investment with ASEAN as a grouping is going to expand significantly as a result of this. The importance of services, of course, will not be missed by all of you because India has a comparative advantage in services, including software, including computer software, including management services, financial services, and we think that we are going to make very good use of this free trade agreement in goods, in services and investment. There's been a lot of people-to-people interaction also. You know, when you have a steep increase in the number of flights, as I showed, it's also because people are traveling as tourists, not just government officials, but also people traveling as tourists. And one example of this is this network of ASEAN India think tanks. And therefore, in fact, I would like to say that I really welcome the establishment of RIGSS because we would like to expand the India-Bhutan interaction amongst think tanks. I think RIGSS already has a very flourishing relationship with some think tanks in India, whether it's the Institute of Defense Studies and Analysis or other think tanks. But I think this is a very important part of relationships between countries because it helps expand the people-to-people relationship apart from the government-to-government relationship or the business-to-business relationship. I must mention here that we have recently appointed, I think, end of last year, maybe very late in 2014, we now have individual ambassadors of India to the individual ASEAN 10 countries, but we also have an ambassador to the ASEAN Secretariat. So this is something which is very recent and I thought it was relevant to mention that to give you an example and give you a flavor of how the India-ASEAN relationship is moving. Two last points. One is that with ASEAN as its core, the East Asia Summit process was established in 2005 and India is a founder member of the East Asia Summit process. Apart from the ASEAN 10, there are of course 8 other countries which includes Japan, South Korea, China, Australia, New Zealand, India and of course the US and Russia. So the EAS as it's called here, we are a founder member of the East Asia Summit process and that started in 2005 and in 2015 it will be the 10th anniversary or the 10th year of the East Asia Summit process. One last point which I thought was very important is that connectivity between India and ASEAN is being improved. We spoke about air connectivity, there's also sea connectivity, but what is important is now that Myanmar is beginning to open up, there is a lot of road connectivity as well. And therefore, India is working on connectivity, including a trilateral highway, which starts in northeastern India and goes through Myanmar into Thailand. And we will soon be able to drive from Bhutan all the way to Bangkok, if you would like to do that. And that's the trilateral highway which we are building. It actually starts in Manipur, in northeastern India. There's a road, of course, connecting Imphal, which is the capital of Manipur, to Moreh. But Moreh is the last town on the Indian side, and the trilateral highway starts there, goes through Mandalay in Myanmar, Yangon, and then goes to a place called Mae Sot in Thailand. And there's already a big expressway running from Mae Sot down to Bangkok. So once that is complete, and I think it's going to be completed by the end of this year or maybe sometime next year, you can actually drive all the way from Thimphu to Bangkok. I don't know how many days it's going to take, and I don't know what will be the status of the highway, but theoretically at least you'll be able to drive, and I think Phuket will have some competition. But I think this is the kind of ambitious programs that we want to undertake with Southeast Asia, and as a result of this, we are looking at also empowering and economically progressing the eastern part of India and northeast India by connectivity, trade, investment with Southeast Asia. So this is something that is important to us, that while the Act East policy is part of foreign policy, it also has many domestic dimensions. As I mentioned earlier, the initial launch of the Act East policy had domestic requirements, and the continuation of the Act East policy also has domestic repercussions, has domestic ramifications. in terms of the development of eastern and northeastern India. I think I've spoken a lot about Southeast Asia, ASEAN as a group. I'd like to turn to some of the other countries which form a part of our Look East policy, and I think I'll do that right now. So let's take a look at how India has been developing its relationship with certain important countries in East Asia. And I think I should start with Japan, because Japan is a very, very important country for India. The reason for it is very simple. That if you look around the world today, India requires investment. And who has the investable resources? I think there are only a handful of countries who have those investable resources which could be invested in India or other parts of the world. And one of those countries is Japan. I think the other is South Korea, or the Republic of Korea. But several years ago, we established what is called an SNGP, and I'm sorry to load these kind of acronyms on you, but the SNGP stands for Strategic and Global Partnership. So we established an India-Japan Strategic and Global Partnership, and when Prime Minister Modi visited Japan last year, he's given it further impetus, and to distinguish it from the earlier measures which are taken, he's called it a special SNGP, or a special strategic and global partnership. Now, part of this is that there is a system of annual summits between the Prime Ministers of India and Japan. So each year, you have the Prime Minister of India and the Prime Minister of Japan meeting each other, alternatively in the two countries. And the reason why the Prime Ministers decided to do this is because when you have regular high-level visits, it also puts pressure on the whole mechanism of government and business to follow up on announcements and commitments made by the Prime Ministers. And we find that with Japan, this has proved to be very, very useful and very effective, because when the two Prime Ministers make an announcement at their summit, it is quickly implemented down the line. So, despite the fact that the bureaucracy in India and the bureaucracy in Japan as well are notorious for being slow, where India-Japan relations is concerned, we find that we are implementing things pretty fast, because we are answerable to the Prime Ministers of our countries every year. And I'd like to mention here in passing that although the visit of President Obama for India's Republic Day celebrations this year in January 2015 did catch worldwide attention, I must mention that the precursor or the forerunner to the invitation to President Obama was an invitation to Prime Minister Abe of Japan to be chief guest at last year's Republic Day, and he did come, and he was the chief guest in January 2014. So those of you who may have been taken aback, and I have no doubt that the invitation to President Obama was something very significant, but you'll see that we had also tested the waters slightly by inviting the Prime Minister of Japan in January 2014 for our Republic Day celebrations. Let me go ahead to sort of outline what Japan has been doing with us in India, what we have been doing with Japan. And I think the most important thing that the Japanese have been doing with us, the government of Japan has been doing with us, and of course the private sector companies of Japan, private corporate sector of Japan has been doing with us, is to build infrastructure in India. And I'll give you just 3 or 4 examples of what kind of infrastructure is being built, because this is a big area of, a big lacuna in India's economy. And once we have the infrastructure, we will be able to make India a manufacturing hub. The Make in India concept that Prime Minister Modi talks about is dependent to a large extent on not only making it easier to do business in India, but also to have the infrastructure. So we have what is called, on the railway side, a Western Dedicated Freight Corridor. Now, this Western Dedicated Freight Corridor is being built entirely with Japanese assistance and by Japanese companies. And the freight corridor is basically between Mumbai on the western coast and Delhi in North India. And let me sort of explain to you in very simple terms why it is necessary to have a dedicated freight or railway freight corridor between Mumbai and Delhi. Of course, these are two very important population centers and demand centers in India. But what happens currently is that the railways and we have the same tracks, which are used by both passenger trains and freight trains. And every time a passenger train comes through, the freight train is put onto a siding. And therefore, to move goods from Mumbai, from the port of Mumbai to Delhi, or from Delhi to the port in Mumbai, it takes roughly 7 days for freight to be moved between Mumbai and Delhi, which is just a distance of 1200 kilometers. Because every time a passenger train comes through, the freight train is put onto the siding. What we are now doing is we are building a dedicated corridor or a dedicated railway line or railway track for just freight. And there will not be an interruption in the movement of these freight trains once this corridor is completed in another couple of years. And you'll be able to move freight from Mumbai to Delhi and Delhi to Mumbai, not in the current 7 days, but in 7 hours. So this is something which is very big and very important. And this is something which we are doing with the Japanese. Japanese companies are working on this, and it's being financed and assisted by the Japanese government. Now, the next important infrastructure project, and these are huge infrastructure projects. As I said, it covers 1200 kilometers between Mumbai and Delhi, is the Delhi-Mumbai Industrial Corridor. So what happened was, when we started building the dedicated freight corridor about 7 years ago, we realized that there are large tracts of land on both sides of the freight corridor. And if the railways are going to pass through that area, we could do industrial corridor on both sides of the freight, of the railway track, which is the dedicated freight corridor. And from that came the idea of Delhi-Mumbai Industrial Corridor. Now, it's not that the entire 1200 kilometers is going to be made into an industrial zone. No, it's not that. It's along this 1200 kilometers that we are now building new cities. And there are seven zones which are being developed along this freight corridor, where the Delhi-Mumbai Industrial Corridor will first build new cities. They are going to be smart cities, as you may have heard, and these are coming up quite quickly. But of course, let me be very realistic, this is not going to come up in the next 2 years. It's going to take much more time to build new cities and smart cities along the corridor between Delhi and Mumbai. Once again, a lot of the investment is coming through private corporate sector in Japan. A lot of the investment is coming from the government of Japan. But because an industrial corridor is a huge project, it goes beyond Japan. So there are other industrialized nations and other countries which are also helping in the industrial corridor which is coming up between Delhi and Mumbai. The Chennai-Bengaluru Industrial Corridor, which is the third major infrastructure project, is actually, there is a lot of industry in this area between Chennai and Bengaluru in south of India. But the Japanese are helping us in upgrading the infrastructure, railways, roads, ports, and that's what is the third large infrastructure area, which is the Chennai-Bengaluru Industrial Corridor, or CBIC in this particular slide. I think it will be remiss if I do not mention the Delhi Metro. And the reason for that is, once again, the Delhi Metro, at least its initial phases, and some of you who have been to Delhi may have travelled in the Delhi Metro, it's really changed life in Delhi. But I'll come to that in a minute. The Delhi Metro was a Japan-assisted project, and the first phase was Japan-assisted, but several phases since then, which have also gone ahead, are not Japan-assisted. They're done by us through our own investment, domestic investment. But definitely, the first phase was assisted by the Japanese, and some of the trains which are running on that first phase and now beyond are all Japanese or Korean trains. So the Delhi Metro itself is something which I keep telling my Japanese friends has not only made it easier for transportation within the huge national capital region of Delhi, but it has also changed values. And I'll give you an example. As the introducer mentioned, I was in Delhi before I came out to Thimphu for 5 long years, or 4.5 years. And at the start of my tenure, I found that all my staff used to come late. But after about a year, I found that they used to come bang on time. 9 a.m. they used to be in office. 2 minutes before 9 they would be in office. And this happened day after day. So I turned around to my staff and said, "What's wrong with you? You used to come first at 10 and and you always told me that, oh, traffic was bad, we were stuck, the roads were in a mess. So what the hell has happened? How come you're coming on time? Not that I'm complaining, but tell me what happened. And then one of them told me that, what we do is I catch the 8:02 train at such and such station, and it drops me at 8:37 at that station. Then I catch a connection at 8:39, and at 8:49 I'm just 5 minutes walk away from the office. So I walk and I'm here at 8:55, and 5 minutes early every day. So this is what it has done in Delhi. It has not just made it easier to travel within the national capital region, but it's also changed values. People are coming on time, also leaving on time, but that's not bad. Now, as a result of the success of the Delhi Metro, and I'm sure some of you may have travelled on it, there are other cities in India which are clamoring to have their own metros. So we have a metro being done in Mumbai, we have a metro being done in Bengaluru, and of course, sure enough, we have a new metro which was announced a few months ago in Ahmedabad, which is the capital of Gujarat, from where Prime Minister Modi comes. So, and the Japanese are helping us in building some of these, not all of them, but some of them are being done with Japanese assistance. And we do hope that, just as the case was with Delhi, where it helped change values, that values will also change in other parts of India as a result of these metro projects. I'd like to just quickly mention that between India and Japan we have a SEPA, which is, I'm sorry to use so many acronyms, I don't know why we do that in India, but a SEPA is a Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement, which is a free trade agreement. It's an FTA, but with the Japanese we call it SEPA, with other countries we call it something else. But we have a free trade agreement between India and Japan, as a result of which trade is going up. But what is even more important is that investment is going up. So Japanese investment into India is going up. And definitely Maruti Suzuki is one of the earliest Japanese investments, very successful. I don't know, and because Maruti cars are also here in Bhutan, I don't know if many of you know this fact, but Suzuki, the main corporation which is incorporated in Japan, makes all its profits on its India operations, which includes the Bhutan operations. It doesn't make profit anywhere else in the world. It makes its entire profit out of its India operations, and as a result of the profit of the India operation, Suzuki Motor Company as a whole is in profit, and old Mr. Osamu Suzuki is laughing to the bank. But I think that is something which we hold up to Japanese business people, that this is the power of the Indian market, the size of the Indian market, and this is what it can do for individual companies, whether out of Japan or out of any other place in the world. And finally, I'd like to end with the last point here, which is actually something which came up during Prime Minister Modi's visit to Japan in September of last year, that corporate Japan has promised large FDI inflows into India. Of course, one of the things is they insist that it should become easier to do business in India, which is something that we know and which we want, not only for Japanese companies, but also for Indian companies. And the whole process, which started way back in 1992, as I had said, of making it easier to do business in India, improving the business environment, is an ongoing process, and I have no doubt that this particular government of India, with its announcements of Make in India, with its focus on increasing the proportion of manufacturing in India's GDP, will focus on this particular aspect of business in India. So just ending with this photograph of Prime Minister Modi and Prime Minister Abe in Tokyo last year. They're very good friends. Prime Minister Modi visited Japan many times before as the Chief Minister of his home state of Gujarat, but now, of course, as Prime Minister, he knows Prime Minister Abe quite well. Let me move on to Korea, because I think I'm slowly taking much more time than I had wanted to, but let me move to the Republic of Korea. Uh, I'd like to point out that when Prime Minister Narasimha Rao launched the Look East policy, which we now call the Act East policy in 1992, the first East Asian country that he visited was Korea, because he realized the potential of corporate Korea. He visited Korea in 1993, and as a result, we found that many Korean companies have been in India since the mid-1990s. Very soon after 1993, after Prime Minister Narasimha Rao's visit to the Republic of Korea, we found many of their companies coming and setting up shop in India. But I must say that they struggled in the early years, in the late 1990s and the early 21st century, in the 2000s. They struggled, including the majors such as Hyundai and LG and Samsung and so on. But after some time, they realized how to do business in India. We made it easier to do business in India. And today, we have an investment from Korea of roughly $5 billion. It's growing, but as all of you know, because there's a spillover effect here in Bhutan too, that Hyundai, Samsung, LG are now household names in India. They are the number one or number two in their sectors. Hyundai, for example, is second only to Maruti Suzuki in cars and automobiles, and has almost 25% of the domestic Indian market. And I suspect it has almost the same amount here in Bhutan, because you see i10s and i20s on the roads here. Samsung mobile telephones, number one in India and number one possibly all over the world, including here in Bhutan. LG doing very, very well in the white goods sector, whether it is in air conditioners or refrigerators, etc., etc. So these companies are now in India, they're in the Indian market, they're investing more. There's one blip on this radar which is called POSCO. It's an iron and steel company. They had wanted to set up the largest steel plant in India almost 8 years back, but that is an investment which has run into hot water in India. But I must say that the company is very, very patient and is still waiting for us to work out all the issues. Let me also point out that there is a large amount of Indian investment in Korea too. Some of our software companies are there in a big way. They don't have a large part of the Korean software market, but they're making headway slowly, just as the Korean companies made headway in India. And Mahindra & Mahindra is there in a large way. They've bought over a Korean automobile company and are beginning to do quite well there. Now, just like in Japan, with Korea too, we have a CEPA, or a free trade agreement, which is helpful in increasing trade, investment, etc. We have a civil nuclear agreement with the Koreans, and we are hoping that they will build nuclear power plants for electricity in India. And there are regular leadership visits between our two countries. So there is a huge potential with the Republic of Korea, part of which has been actualized, has been implemented, but I think there's much more which is to come in the coming days and years. And we definitely look on the Republic of Korea as a very important partner in India's growth and development story. Ending with this photograph, which was at the end of last year, where the two foreign ministers of India and Korea met in Seoul. And that takes me to Australia, because I think Australia is a very important part of India's Look East, Act East policy. It is a very important partner for India as a strategic partnership. We're working on a free trade agreement with them, not yet concluded, but there's already a civil nuclear agreement which shows the way the two countries are working. And of course, there are expanding trade and investment ties, as well as political dialogue between the two countries. The Prime Minister of Australia visited us in September last year, and our own Prime Minister went there very soon thereafter. So I'll not spend too much time on Australia, because it is an important player in East Asia and Southeast Asia. But I'll end with this slide of the two Prime Ministers. And that brings me to my specialization, as the speaker who introduced me said, which is what's happening between India and China. So let me start by saying that China is a very important part of our Look East, Act East policy too, and it's a growing economy, the second largest in the world today. This is something which is a very integral and important part of India's Look East, Act East policy. Regular leadership visits. In fact, what has held the India-China relationship in place is the fact that our top leaders, the Prime Minister of India, the President of India, and similarly the Prime Minister and President of China, we have regular visits. I just showed you the photograph of President Xi Jinping of China visiting India in September, and our own Prime Minister is going to visit China in the coming months. Trade itself has grown by leaps and bounds as both China and India have become larger trading nations. We have seen trade grow from $3 billion bilateral trade in 2000 to almost $68 billion in 2013, and I believe it was $75 or $76 billion in 2014. And just like with other countries, we have a target of $100 billion in this year. Don't know if we're going to meet that target or not, but I think both countries are trying their best. However, there is a blip on the radar here because India faces a large trade deficit with China. In fact, this is a problem area in expanding trade because if trade increases, we find that the deficit increases also, and in almost 30% of India's global trade deficit in foreign trade with the whole world, almost 30% of that is with China. So these are huge numbers. We believe that we cannot push our exports, including in the services sector, because of non-tariff barriers which are erected by the Chinese government. We have been working with them, wanting to remove non-tariff barriers. It's not just Indian companies which face this in China. There are companies from across the world which face it. And I think we are, as a group, trying to work with them. Of course, China is now also a member of the WTO, so there are certain remedial measures which are available to all countries across the world. Looking at investments, we've recently agreed with the Chinese that we can set up dedicated Chinese industrial parks in India. We're looking at one or two places, and this dedicated industrial parks is because most companies from East Asia, whether it's China or Japan or Korea, they like to cluster together. They like to be in the same area with each other. They find strength in numbers, and therefore we have agreed to set up a Chinese industrial park in India. It's still in the nascent stages. We're looking at places where they can do so. I think I should mention two or three things here. One is that in the telecom sector, of course, Chinese companies are doing very well around the globe and definitely in India. Huawei is one company, ZTE is another, you may have heard of them, but they're pretty big in the telecom sector in India. The railways is another important area of cooperation between India and China. We found that the Chinese have done very well in increasing the speed of existing railways. That is, they've gone from 120, 140 kilometers an hour to almost 200, 220 kilometers an hour. And we are working with them to bring that into India, where you strengthen your tracks and all your trains can run at almost double the speed of about 200 to 250 kilometers an hour. So railways is an important sector of cooperation between India and China. Of course, there are Indian companies which are very successful in China. Tata's is one example. In the automobile sector, Mahindra's is a second. They have tractors which they are manufacturing and selling in the Chinese market. Tata Consultancy Services, the software arm of the Tata Group, is doing very well indeed in China. Some of the downsides, of course, is that where the India-China relationship is concerned, we have an outstanding boundary issue, a boundary question. It's been festering for a very, very long time. What we have done is we have tried to stabilize the boundary, make sure that there are no incidents, that there are no clashes or skirmishes on the boundary. But as a result of that, there is a lack of trust and understanding between India and China. And that lack of trust and understanding is also impacting the business sector to a certain extent, because the lack of trust and understanding at the political level also impacts economics and business and so on and so forth. But one of the areas where the two governments are focusing on is greater people-to-people exchanges. So we have been encouraging tourism, etc. And let me say that we will continue to engage China. and we'll continue to work with them in sorting out our own issues bilaterally, whether it's the boundary or the large trade deficit that India faces in its trade with China, and ensure there are certain issues which the Chinese have with us. So we will continue to engage. I think both sides will continue to work with each other in the coming years. Let me end, because as was said when I was introduced, I've lived and worked in China for many years, from the mid 1980s till my most recent visit there was probably last year sometime. But I must mention something about China as a nation or the country. I lived in Beijing during the Tiananmen incident of 1989, June 1989, and I think the Tiananmen incident provided a window into the true nature of the Chinese polity. It's a single party state, and the current party will do its utmost in ensuring that this continues. The economic miracle, yes, definitely, I've seen it happen. I remember in the late 1980s, 87 or 88, Beijing airport was worse than Delhi. Today, of course, it is much bigger and much better than the airport in Delhi. But there's definitely the economic miracle is a fact. Living standards have risen rapidly, there's no doubt about that. But there are many problems which the Chinese themselves admit. For example, there are disparities between regions, between individuals. There is definitely enough proof to show that people who are members of the Communist Party of China do better than others. So there are disparities in income and wealth between regions, between individuals. But I'm sure the Chinese leadership is aware of it and is also addressing those issues. Couple of last points just to spark your interest. One is that if you look at the history of China, and you don't have to go thousands of years, but if you look at the history of the communist China since 1949, you'll see that there are serious problems in the country, political problems, when its leadership is divided and squabbling. So if you look at recent history, in the late 1950s, there was a great leap forward. In the 1960s, there was the Cultural Revolution. And then, of course, in 1989, there was the Tiananmen Square incident. But all those incidents happened when the leadership of China, the Chinese Communist Party, was divided and squabbling. And that is something you've got to watch out for, because if the leadership is divided and squabbling, which I believe it is today, you can have serious issues internally within China. And I don't think I'm saying anything new. I say this to my friends in China also. And finally, I'd like to finish off with saying that in China, what you see is not what you get, in the sense that you might see the spanking new buildings, but the older buildings are then covered and kept behind high walls. Whereas, and I want to juxtapose that with India. In India, what you see is what you get. We don't try to hide our poverty. We don't try to hide we don't try to hide our old buildings. We don't try to hide our bad roads. But that, I believe, is a very important difference between India and China. In India, what you see is what you get. In China, what you see is not what the reality is. And let me end by just giving you an example of this difference between India and China. It's something which I've used for several years now. But if you go to the main square of Beijing and you shout, turn left, 99% of the people in that square will turn left. If you go to India, to Delhi and do the same thing, about 25% will turn left. 25% will say, who the hell is this fellow, I'm going to turn right. And the remaining 50% will say, who is this ignorant fool, just ignore him. So I think that's the big difference between our two countries. But I want to stop there. I think I have taken more time than I had said I would. But let me say once again that it's a great pleasure to be able to address the Royal Institute of Governance and Strategic Studies here. I hope I've not bored you too much, but I'd be very happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency, for your enriching talk and helping us understand the India's East Act policy and I'm sure there are a lot of takeaways from Excellency's talk. The floor is now open for Q&A, question and answers, and you can see 2 microphones there, so if you have questions, you have to go there and actually say out your question. Yes.
Your Excellency, thank you very much for your very informative presentation. I am one of the participants of this program here at RIGSS. I just wanted to ask 3 short questions. One is, I just wanted to tell that very few of us here in Bhutan know about this Act-East policy. But the time when I learned about it, I got the impression that it was a policy more to counter the China's expansionist policy. And at that time when this was being introduced, I think there were even reports in the media in China that this was in fact a misguided fear of India to China on the strategic ambitions of China. So I don't know how far this is true, but this is what I have actually learned about this policy. The second one is, I just wanted to find out the kind of implications that this relationship with the Tibetan refugees had to this Act-East policy, particularly having the government of India having given this asylum to His Holiness the Dalai Lama. And the third one is pertaining to our own institution here in Bhutan, particularly the generous assistance government of India is actually giving to our 5-year plan programs. And we learned that for the 11th 5-year plan, we have about 45 billion plus I think another 5 billion for the economic stimulus plan. And just recently in the media we learned that there has been an enhancement up to 65 billion. I don't know how far that's true, but we are not able to confirm because we just get from the media. So if it has been enhanced, that's almost, we are almost grateful actually. The point I want to make here is during the 10th 5-year plan, especially those sectors, receiving support from this project-type assistance, we encountered quite a big difficulties because of the delayed release of funds from the government of India. And fortunately, of course, during the 10th 5-year plan, the Ministry of Finance came to our rescue by issuing this pre-finances. But this year, not this year, during the 11th 5-year plan, Ministry of Finance has actually warned us that perhaps these pre-finances might not come. So if there is delay in the release of funds from the government of India, I think the sectors will be facing tremendous difficulties. So if Your Excellency can kindly also provide some assurances that there will be no delay in the funds being released. Thank you very much.
I think I prefer to do it from here. It's much better than sitting there. Thank you. 3 questions. One is, let me start with the third question first because it's the simplest and your first question was the most difficult. So let me answer the questions in reverse. As far as assistance by India to Bhutan is concerned, when you use the word which I hear very often here, saying generous assistance. Let me be very frank with you that this is a 2-way street. The reason why India assists Bhutan's economic development is for its own self-interest also, and for the self-interest of Bhutan also. But this is something which has worked well for both of us, and therefore we will continue to do it if you want it. If you don't want our assistance, all you have to do is stay. So let me say that, we should not use the word generous. There is assistance, that's a fact of life, but it is in the interest of each country, both Bhutan and India. I don't want to talk about the 10th plan, but my own understanding of the economic situation was that there was such rapid growth that it led to overheating of the economy. And as a result of that, there was a need to slow down the economy, and that has happened over the last couple of years. And that now again Bhutan is poised for very rapid, let's say steady economic growth. I think that's the right way to do it. And every country goes through this kind of cycle. It's something that you have to do and learn on your own, and I'm sure Bhutan has learned on its own and will rectify all this in the coming years. I know that the GDP growth rate in 2013 was 2.05%. That is well known to all of us. But I've also been reading that the projected GDP growth in 2014 is close to 6%. And I would say that's a very good achievement. It's something that Bhutan should continue to do, because 6 to 7%, maybe 6 to 8% growth is something which is steady, which is sustainable. But anything more than that might lead to reheating or overheating of the economy. As far as release of funds is concerned, I don't want to say much because it will be blowing my own trumpet. But in this year, 2014 and till now in 2015, there's been no problems in the release of funds. And also, I don't want to say that it's only my doing. It's of course the doing of the Government of India. But I don't see a problem in the release of funds. And I'm pretty certain that it will be a continuous and very steady sort of progress in that. So that's the direct question on Bhutan. These are my views. I don't know if you agree with them, but this is, in any case, that's what my views are. On Tibetan refugees, yes, you're absolutely right. We have roughly 100,000 Tibetan refugees in India, including His Holiness the Dalai Lama and many other lamas, as you know. There's no doubt that as long as those Tibetan refugees want to continue to live in India, they're welcome to do so. And they will be more than welcome in India. If this is something which other countries don't like, there's nothing I can do or nothing India can do about it. As long as they want to stay in India, they're most welcome to stay in India. And your first question about the Look East, Act East policy to counter China, I would, go so far as to say that the Look East, Act East policy is once again something that India follows for its own self-interest. It's something, as I tried to explain to you over the last 45 minutes, almost an hour, that we did from our own domestic necessities and also from our foreign policy perspective. But if any country thinks that it is mainly to counter some other country, I think they're giving too much importance to themselves. And this is something which is not being driven by countering country A or country B or country C. It is something which has been driven by India's own necessities, its own needs, and its own requirements. Thank you. Yes, please. There's a hand up here right in front, but we should also get some questions from the back.
Your Excellency, I'm banker by profession. I'm one of the self-participants. My question is, what is India's stand on removing restriction on INR 500 and 1,000 as reportedly done for Nepal?
No, very simple. It has been done for Nepal and Bhutan. So Indian travelers to Nepal and Bhutan can carry 500 rupee and 1,000 rupee notes up to a total of 25,000. And I can tell you that my effort has been through this whole process of removing this upper limit of 25,000 for Bhutan while it remains in place for Nepal. So even today, Indian travelers to Bhutan who are coming out from India can carry 500 and 1,000 rupee notes, but up to a maximum of 25,000. So that's the current policy. It's a policy for both Nepal and Bhutan. But my effort is to de-link Nepal and Bhutan and to make it without this ceiling of 25,000 for Bhutan. With Nepal, we have to go a bit slowly for various reasons, which you as a banker would be aware of. Thank you. Yes, please. There's someone at the back. Maybe you'll take that question. Sorry. And then after that, you, sir.
Good evening. I introduce myself as Machu. I'm a student in Gautam College of Business Studies, taking Master in Business Administration Finance. So, to Your Excellency, I've got two questions. Number one is, in today's time, when we live in a global village, do you think that the regional arrangements such as regional agreements such as ASEAN, NAFTA, Mercosur, etc., will make WTO less relevant or less important? Second one is, in international trade, developing countries such as India and China, etc., have pushed over the cost of production due to the labor standard. So regional trade arrangement within the developing countries will take them where? So these are my two questions.
Thank you. Very good questions. I'll try to answer them. I don't profess to know the actual answers to these questions. You're not wrong in the sense that regional trading arrangements do fly in the face of global trading arrangements. We do have the WTO. You're not wrong. But at the same time, I think the WTO rules and regulations, they do permit regional trading arrangements. Also, we find that regional trading arrangements are what have led to an expansion of trade and investment amongst the region at first, and then they get expanded to the rest of the globe. So it's not necessarily a bad thing, and I don't think the two are completely contradictory or in contrast to each other. That regional trading arrangements do work into and do dovetail into global trading arrangements. So that's my answer to your first question. And let me say that, if you look at the European Union or if you look at the ASEAN countries, you find that their first steps were intra-regional, where trade and investment were concerned. And then, of course, it was also extra-regional. So my own view is that regional arrangements complement global arrangements. On labor standards, etc., yes, you're absolutely right. What is beginning to happen is that the rules of the game internationally are being changed even as we speak. And I think there are certain new standards which are coming in which may not be something we might all desire, including developing countries like Bhutan, India, China, Malaysia and others. We might all aspire to those standards, but we are not in a position to implement them right now. And I think the voice of the developing countries is being made apparent in these negotiations, whether it is on labor standards, whether it is on trading arrangements, whether it is something like trade arrangements within large groups of countries, and also environmental standards. So I think that is something that, yes, we do aspire for. Yes, we do want them, but obviously we are not at the same level of economic development as many other countries, and we may not be able to implement them right away. And these voices are being heard in international fora. Thank you. Yes, the lady at the back, please. Sir, I'll come back to you, but since we have a first lady going to ask a question, I have to give the floor to her.
Good evening, Your Excellency. My name is Kina and I'm doing MBA from Gautam College. So my question is, how do you see the role of Bhutan in Act East policy? Thank you.
Yeah, good question. As I said in my presentation, the way I look at it is anything that lies east of India is part of our Look East or Act East policy. And since Bhutan definitely is towards the eastern part of India, or towards the east of the central point in India, that Bhutan would also be part of this Act East policy. But let me go beyond that, because I also hinted at it in my earlier remarks that the India-Bhutan relationship was something which was established, and I would give all the credit to the monarchs of Bhutan, going way back to His Majesty the Third King of Bhutan, followed by the fourth and fifth kings. So this was something which was established much before, in the late 1950s, much before India embarked on its Act East policy in 1992. And the India-Bhutan relationship is, of course, much further ahead than where our relations with other parts of East Asia is today. So I would say that, yes, very broadly, Bhutan lies to the east of India, but the India-Bhutan relationship far surpasses our relationship with East Asian and Southeast Asian countries. Thank you.
Your Excellency, welcome to RIGSS. My name is Sunil Amge. I'm also one of the participants of this ongoing program. Please permit me to ask a couple of questions outside the frame of your presentation.
Sure.
One is we are often talking about peace in our region, namely SAARC region, and it's very difficult to assure peace when our big brothers like India and Pakistan continue to have a lot of tussles. So if Your Excellency could update on this issue. And the other one is the Western hegemonic attitude, chiefly navigated by the USA and followed by some other countries in Europe. Often, I think we are misguided as in the name of democracy. I think there are so many destructions, so many problems being created in many regions of the world, maybe Eastern Ukraine, maybe Middle East and elsewhere. I think what has happened in Iraq and also what has happened in Libya, Syria, I think are the results of this hegemonic attitude. So where does India stand against this Western hegemonic attitude?
So in answer to the first question about SAARC and India-Pakistan relations, let me say that, SAARC, of course, is still 30 years on after the sort of establishment of SAARC. We're still in our infancy, and the reason for that is not far to be found because there were certain historical realities which exist in this part of the world. But also let me say that I think what we should be doing is that we should be, if certain countries are not ready, and sure, I completely agree that we should go within SAARC as a group at a pace which is comfortable for all the countries in the grouping. So if certain countries are not happy or are not comfortable with the pace at which things are going, we should factor that in, we should recognize it, we should honor it. But that should not mean that certain subgroups of SAARC should not move ahead on certain issues. And we can show the way, and then others will join us and follow us later. And there is something which is actually happening in this respect, and let me share that with you. Bangladesh, Bhutan, India, and Nepal have been working as a subgroup of SAARC. We are close to agreeing to and signing a motor vehicles agreement, should happen in the next few months. And the way we should look at this is that these 4 countries, which are a subset of SAARC, should move ahead, and others will join in at a later point in time. And let me remind you that at the Kathmandu summit of the SAARC grouping, just a few months ago, this motor vehicles agreement was thought of. It was put forward before the countries. Certain countries did not find it convenient to do it right now. Maybe they'll find it convenient to do it in a few months or in a few years. But this should not stop at least a subset, these 4 countries, Bangladesh, Bhutan, India, and Nepal, to move ahead with this. And I would say that we are also moving ahead with other such initiatives in a subset of SAARC or a certain group of countries which are all members of SAARC but which are confident and who find it convenient to them to move ahead. I think this is the way forward, and I think SAARC as a whole will also benefit from it. On India-Pakistan relations, I don't want to say much because I think what is happening is that over the years, over the decades, several prime ministers of India have extended the hand of friendship to Pakistan. And to be fair, several leaders of Pakistan have also extended the hand of friendship to India. But there are certain non-state actors in Pakistan which also take a hand in this. And frankly, at a much more holistic level, what I would like to say is that Pakistan has to decide how it wants to move ahead with this relationship. And we'll be happy to accommodate them, go with them, go at a pace which is convenient to them, just as I said in SAARC. On Western hegemonic attitude, I'm afraid I don't use these terms. These are all terms of the past. We should not use them today. Each country is following its own national interest. It might be the right way to go ahead. It may not be the right way to go ahead. As I was trying to hint, and I'm sure you got it, that the Act East policy that India has been following since 1992, we think is in our best interest. We think we are benefiting from it, and we think that this is a good policy. So I'm sure that other countries will also realize that there are certain policy successes, certain policy failures, and will adjust to that and change along with changing times. But also let me say that in international negotiations, and this was part of the answer that I gave to the young student from Gedu College earlier, I think many of us are able to make our points very clearly and very succinctly, and that these are being heard by the international community. So I think we need to move forward. We should not worry about what you describe as Western hegemonic attitudes. We should move forward with confidence that each one of us knows what each country is doing, and if you approach these issues, international issues, from a position of confidence and strength, they will work out for the countries concerned, each individual country. Thank you. Yes, at the back there, and then we'll come to you. I think you switched it off.
Good evening, Your Excellency. Your speech was very much knowledgeable. Thank you for that. My question is that India plus ASEAN has so many plans and strategies towards the development at this policy, and I would like to know that what is the take of India plus ASEAN on climate change, global warming, which is becoming a huge topic today, though that there has been several summits, and it is affecting Bhutan in a big way. We would like to know that.
No, thank you very much. Good question. Climate change, global warming. As I said, it's not just affecting Bhutan. This is something which affects the whole globe and every country which is a member of this world. So it's affecting all of us. I think what is important is to see how we can move ahead collectively. And it's very important for each member nation of these international conferences and international negotiations on climate change and what we should be doing about it, to approach it with a positive attitude. I think India definitely wants to do its bit for arresting climate change and for arresting the global warming, which is definitely a fact of life and which is taking place. But I think other countries must also approach it this way. For example, the Kyoto Protocol was something which was very positive, but the fact that it is soon no longer to be in existence is a negative way of approaching global warming and global climate change negotiations. So on this particular issue, I don't think India and ASEAN have common attitudes. In fact, ASEAN doesn't have a common position on on climate change negotiations. Each of the individual countries have their own slightly differentiated positions. And I think India also has a differentiated position from that of the individual ASEAN countries. But as a group, you're absolutely right. We need to tackle it. We need to tackle it soon. And we hope that at the negotiations which are to be held later this year in Paris, that there will be some positive outcomes. And India will definitely work towards that. Thank you. Please.
Good evening and thank you, Your Excellency. I've read in the media that the East has its arms open and are ready to embrace both Prime Minister Modi and the Act East policy. I've also read that the Prime Minister's hands remain tied by Delhi's political and bureaucratic inertia. Your Excellency, could you please throw some light on first, how can Delhi's political and bureaucratic system affect the Act East policy? Second, with a lot of open trade routes and high connectivity, there's surely going to be a lot of migration issues. I'd like to know, how does India plan to deal with the migration issues that would come after the policy comes into action? Thank you.
Good questions. I don't know if I have the answers to all of them, but let me try. About the Prime Minister's hands being tied in implementing the Look East policy, you're not wrong in the sense that in general there has been a bit of lethargy in implementing any kind of policy, whether it is domestic or whether it is part of foreign policy. But I think if you look at, and this is why I tried to show you what has happened in the last few months since Prime Minister Modi was elected and took office, you'll find that the Look East policy has actually moved into a higher gear, and therefore we are trying to call it an Act East policy to encapsulate this higher gear that we are moving into. And I don't think bureaucratic or political lethargy is going to come in the way. And let me be very frank that Prime Minister Modi is a man of action, and if there is bureaucratic lethargy, he will make sure that that lethargy is quickly dissipated or moved out of the way. So I'll be very frank with you. I myself need to deliver very quickly on his commitment to have an e-library in Bhutan. Otherwise, I will find myself without a job. I'm working very hard. So I think the bureaucratic lethargy and political indifference is a thing of the past, and that we're really moving ahead very proactively and very, very positively. On migration issues, let me put it this way, that yes, the free trade agreements do have a component on movement of natural persons. And this is required because there are certain industries where you have to send your own people to do the work, and software, computer software is one such example. And we know that there is a backlash against Indian companies who are hiring Indian people at lower wages in the United States, for example. I don't want to take any other example. But I think this is something which will work itself out and which will work its way through. Also, let me put it this way, that the vision that Prime Minister Modi has outlined for India, where we also increase the amount of manufacturing in our GDP, at least as far as India is concerned, and there are other countries where migration issues will be important, but as far as India is concerned, I think there will not be out migration, but there will probably be in migration. Even today, if you go to Bangalore, you will find that many of our software companies, you have young people who have been trained in software at university and other places, who are wanting to first work in the software industry in Bangalore and Madras, Chennai, and come and pick up jobs, whether it's from Eastern Europe, whether it's from Western Europe, whether it's from North America. And this is a trend, I think, which you will continue to see. And therefore, the whole way we look at migration will probably turn on its head in a few years from now. But again, I think these are my views. I don't know if you agree with them. You are free to disagree with them, because I'm not saying that I'm always right. But I think there is a sea change which is happening even as we speak and as we talk. So I think, even on issues such as migration, there is going to be a turnaround, which is already happening on a small scale, but will happen on a bigger scale as we move ahead. And I think even when that situation arises, we should be open to having migration in all directions, because we should look at ourselves, as someone said, as a global village and not as individual political countries. So I don't know if I've answered your question, but I've tried my best. I think there was a hand up at the back, so maybe we'll go to the back. Was there someone at the back who wanted to ask a question? Yes, please. And then we'll come to the hands in front.
Excellency, I'm from a manufacturing background based in Queensland, and my question is a bit out of scope from your presentation. It is in relationship with the stability of the Northeast. The manufacturing units here based in Queensland are heavily reliant on raw materials which originate from the Northeast. So recently, in the recent events, we have a lot of instability in the Northeast, which is why we are heavily, the supply chain has increasingly become very erratic. So, Your Excellency, if you could please give us an insight on whether there is a possibility in the near future on the stability of Northeast. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that question. Let me start by saying that I don't think it is out of context with my speech, because the northeast of India is an integral part of our Look East or Act East policy. So I it's a very relevant question, and thank you for asking it. A very good question, and again, let me start by saying that you are factually very correct in saying that the northeastern part of India is a little unstable. Let me also add to that. Let me say that over the last 20 years or so, the south of India, the west of India, and the north of India have progressed very, very rapidly. And the east and northeast of India has not progressed at that particular rate. And therefore, as a result, we find that east and northeast India is a little behind the rest of India. And there are huge efforts which are ongoing even now to ensure that the east part of India and the northeastern part of India is able to catch up with the rest of India. I always say to my friends that, it's a fact of history and geography and you have no choice about it, but Bhutan is contiguous with West Bengal and Assam. What would have happened if it had been contiguous with Gujarat and Maharashtra? But that's a question which is a hypothetical question, so we should not spend too much time on it. But let me also say that there are great efforts ongoing to ensure the stability, as you call it, or you refer to it as the instability, to ensure that Northeast India and Eastern India become more stable. And this has many prongs. There's a political aspect to it, there's an economic aspect to it, and I think the state governments and the central government are working on this very, very assiduously. When will it happen? I really don't know. I mean, I can't, I'm not a fortune teller, so I can't put a date on it. But we hope that it will happen very soon in the next coming few years. And along with that will come stability along Bhutan's southern border, and therefore greater predictability about things like the supply chain, raw materials, and so on and so forth. So I've tried to answer the question at a holistic level and not go into your individual problem and issues, but I thought it was better to do it that way because it's of relevance to all of us rather than to your specific issue, which I sympathize with, and I think you're absolutely right. I know it's a fact of life for you, but I think in a few years we will get to a situation of relative stability vis-a-vis instability. Thank you. Yes, and we'll come to all of you in a little bit.
Your Excellency, I am also one of the participants of the CELF program at RIGSS. My question is based on my own curiosity. As a diplomat who has lived in China during the Tiananmen incident in 1989 and who understands the Chinese political system from close quarters, how do you see the political system in China evolving? In other words, what kind of future political system do you foresee in China?
I hope you're not trying to get me into trouble with the Chinese. No, but I said that flippantly and more to raise a laugh. But let me put it this way, that there are many observers of the international scene who even today say that in the long run, India's stability is greater than China's. And the reason for that is because we have a stable political system and the Chinese have a relatively unstable political system. This does not mean that India does not face its own problems, its own challenges, its own issues, or for that matter that China doesn't face its own problems, its own issues, its own challenges. And both countries, I think it's for the people of each country to decide what kind of political system they want. I think the Chinese have chosen the kind of political system they want, and we in India and you in Bhutan have chosen the kind of political system you want. But in the long run, the system that you and we have chosen, I think, is more reliable, more predictable, more dependable, and more stable than what the Chinese have done. One-party political systems, if you look at history, and I'm sure there are many historians in this group, in this August gathering, who will tell you that one-party political systems are not very stable, and in the longer run, they are very, very unstable. So if you don't quote me to the Chinese Communist Party, I will go with this explanation. Thank you. Thank you. Yes, sir.
Thank you, Your Excellency. From China to Northeast, very close to Bhutan, I would like to draw your kind attention on the domestic security that we face. Could you please highlight or share what are some of the measures being taken by the central government, or for that matter, the state? For instance, like the incidences of kidnapping that we see of our innocent Bhutanese along the southern border. Thank you so much.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you for that question. I'll try to be as undiplomatic as possible. Let me start by saying that we are very conscious and very aware of the concerns of a small nation like Bhutan. Small in terms of area and population, especially when you have a big neighbor like India, which is large in area and population on your borders. So we start from that fact that we are very sensitive on this issue. And in fact, someone once asked me that the elephant can move ahead and trample the grass underneath. But let me tell you that this elephant is very sensitive to the grass underneath its feet. Let me, on the specific issues, let me tell you that when there were these incidents of robbery and theft on the NH31 near Alipurdwar, we immediately took it up with the government of West Bengal. And in fact, we were lucky that the additional chief secretary for Home Affairs of the government of West Bengal was in Thimphu. And what I did was that I requested the Home Minister and the Home Secretary to give him an understanding of the situation. And he came down to Phuncholing and then drove from here back to Bagdogra and then beyond. But the police authorities on our side were immediately told about this. And as a result of their activity and their actions, they actually nabbed and caught and apprehended a group of people who were doing these robberies of Bhutanese nationals driving in Bhutanese cars on NH31 around Alipurdwar area. And since then, about a gang of something like 10 or 12 of them has been arrested. The legal process has started against them. And these robberies of innocent people on Alipurdwar on the highway has stopped entirely. Let me also mention that on cases of sandalwood smuggling, that the police in the contiguous areas with Bhutan have been very, very active. And on the Indian side, we have apprehended at least 2 or 3 such groups of people who have been smuggling sandalwood and red sandalwood. So on that front also, I think we are working very well. And the cooperation between the authorities in Bhutan and India and the contiguous areas of India in West Bengal, Assam and other parts is very, very close and very, very regular. So it's almost exemplary. Someone said the India-Bhutan relationship is exemplary. Actually, the cooperation between our policing authorities is something which is really exemplary and which is not written about much in the newspapers and in the media here in Bhutan. On the kidnappings, yes, this is something which I cannot claim has come to an end. We know that this has happened. We know who is doing it. But you know that there is, over the last couple of months, there has been a very intense operation which is going on in the contiguous part of India against some of these elements which are either militants or which have indulged in kidnapping. It is ongoing even 2 months down the line, even today as we speak. Once again, there is exemplary cooperation between the Indian authorities and the Bhutanese authorities. And there are a number of people who have either been apprehended or been caught and so on and so forth. But what is important is that the operation continues. And we hope that as a result of these operations, all these militant elements which were doing the kidnappings will also, that the kidnappings themselves will also come to an end. I do not want to claim that this has already happened, but I am hopeful that it will happen in the near future. I think these are some of the points which you wanted me to touch upon, and I think I'd like to end by saying that I'm very hopeful that this behavior by antisocial and militant elements will come to an end fairly soon. Of course, I completely agree with you that we should continue to work in this direction and ensure that it stays that way, rather than there be a resurgence after a few weeks or months or years. Let me just say that as a result of excellent cooperation between the authorities in India and Bhutan, that we have been able to achieve these successes on the issues that you raised. Thank you. The lady here, please, because she's had her hand up for quite some time.
Thank you, Your Excellency. My name is Kesam Sumo. I am one of the participants of SEF. I noticed in Your Excellency's presentation that in the early 90s, that India also went through economic, foreign currency crisis, and India decided to focus on development, seeking investment from outside, both for foreign currency, but also focusing on the criteria you stressed, that it was on local development and domestic needs. And I wanted to ask Your Excellency if for Bhutan also we are in a similar situation. Do you think that we also have sort of, while we look outside for investment in foreign currency, that the investments where we seek, should it be for export, for sake of export, but export building on domestic needs and domestic requirements? And when we look at our investments, are we focusing too much on certain sectors? And as Your Excellency also said, that we maybe need to slow down our economy to take a look at where the priorities are. Me working in a private sector, we feel maybe there is need to look at sectors which may be able to build resilience in our economy in the primary sector. But that also requires development in infrastructure which facilitates export, which is infrastructure in roads. I would like to request Your Excellency's view on, from your short tenure so far in Bhutan, do you think that we have reached limits where we might need to look at our investment in certain sectors? And especially in Hyderabad, do you think we have reached a ceiling where our carrying capacity or resilience capacity has reached? Or do you think like we need to sort of there is opportunity to look more in that area?
Thank you. I think a number of questions in what you've asked, but let me start with the macro picture first. Let me once again reiterate that what I stated was my understanding of Bhutan's economic development over the last few years. There was rapid economic growth in 2009-10, and as a result of that, there was a huge demand for imports, and as a result of that, there was a rupee crunch or a rupee shortage. Now, also what resulted from that was high inflation. And this is what is referred to as overheating of the economy. So that's why I use that term, that there was economic overheating in Bhutan as a result of policies which led to very high growth and also resulted in high inflation. It also results in foreign exchange problems and foreign crisis because you are importing huge amounts of raw materials or whatever. And therefore, I think the Bhutanese government, the royal government of Bhutan, realized that high growth rates of over 10% are not sustainable. They lead to these issues. And therefore, the royal government of Bhutan decided to slow down the economy slightly. So the economic brakes had to be put on. As a result, the GDP growth rate came down. As a result, inflation has come down. And as a result, the foreign exchange crisis or the rupee crunch has been resolved. Today, I don't think there is a rupee crunch or a rupee crisis. And now the stage is set. In fact, it's already happened. In my understanding, the lowest level of GDP growth was in 2013, 2.05% as per the Statistical Bureau of Bhutan. But from what we hear in 2014, calendar 2014, the GDP growth rate of Bhutan is roughly 6% or thereabouts. Now, in my opinion, a 6% rate of growth is sustainable for Bhutan, maybe 7%, but this will be a steady rate of growth which will not lead to the problems that happened in the near past. It will not lead to overheating of the economy, it will not lead to high inflation, it will not lead to a foreign exchange or rupee crisis, and at the same time there will be steady economic development, steady growth, steady expansion of employment opportunities, which is good for Bhutan. This is my understanding of the Bhutanese economy. I may be wrong, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think I'm far off from the truth. And I think that the current government of Bhutan, the royal government of Bhutan, is on the right track of steady and sustainable economic development and growth. And I think this is, in my opinion, this is what you should continue to do. So all these things at the macro level are all interconnected. On limits to a particular sector, I definitely agree that Bhutan should look beyond hydropower and tourism for perhaps another area of growth. I personally believe that it can come from agro-processing. Just a few days ago, I kept telling people that, drup jams are very popular in Delhi, but you only get them in the Delhi market. You don't get them in any other part of India, whether it's in Bombay or Mumbai, in Chennai or Bangalore or Hyderabad. So I would even suggest that Bhutan needs to leverage the large and growing Indian market for its own benefit. Look for a particular sector where you can sell more and more to India. You don't have to look far. You don't have any too high transportation costs. You don't need a port from which to export these products. I personally feel agro-processing is a possible area. Having said that, let me also say that your question about limits to a particular area, I understand where that question comes from. This is something which the people of Bhutan have to decide. If you feel that hydropower is important to you, then you should expand hydropower. If you think you have come to the limit of hydropower and want to stop it, please go ahead and do it, because there's always a balance between expanding hydropower and protecting the environment. But this is something which the people of Bhutan, which you have to decide, not the government of India or the people of India. And in any case, the point is that if you want to expand hydropower, we are willing to support you, we are willing to assist you. If you don't want to expand hydropower, we'll be happy with that too. Because after all, the amount of power which is sold by Bhutan to India, yes, it is important for us, yes, it is important for you, but it is a very small fraction of our total requirements and needs, and we'll get it from some other part, from some other place or from some other part of the world, or from our own generation capacities. So I think these issues of limits to particular sectors is something that the people of Bhutan have to do, and I believe you have a political system to be able to do that of participative democracy. You now have a system of participative democracy where the people of Bhutan can actually make their voice heard, and I'm sure that what the people of Bhutan decide is for the best of the people. So I'll end with that, and I highly appreciate your question, and thank you for asking me. Thank you. Yes. Okay, absolutely. I've been told this should be the last question. I'm sorry, I am carried away with all the questions, and I must apologize for that. I didn't realize it's so late.
Your Excellency, thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to ask the last question. I think you have rightly mentioned about the rupee crisis, and I just like to ask Your Excellency, the current situation, if you just walk across Gautam, we still face a lot of problem. So if you buy something from India, I think we are charged at least 6% more than what is required to pay for that. So I was thinking, is there any way the Indian government is looking into this issue to solve it? Because otherwise, I personally feel that there's going to be a big impact again on the Bhutanese economy.
Mm-hmm. Yes, thank you. Yes, I will address that question in case I haven't made myself clear so far. This is a result of demand and supply, And you're absolutely right. What you're saying is factually correct. I cannot disagree with what you're saying. However, it is pure demand and supply. And the fact is that I think Bhutan needs to find a third area apart from hydropower and apart from tourism where it can sell in India. And I personally believe that agro-processing has tremendous potential, and for that, of course, you have to increase the amount of fruits and vegetables which are grown in Bhutan, and there is an endless demand in India for all these sort of things. Also, yes, apart from the broader and macro level way to tackle it by looking at both the demand and the supply side, I think the Reserve Bank of India is also looking into this issue. They are very, very aware of the point that you mentioned about the premium which is being charged in Jaigaon and beyond. And one way to do it is to absorb Multrum and have a central settlement process between the two central banks. And we're looking at the possibility of doing that. But however, those are all short-term measures. The long-term measure is to affect both demand and supply. And I think we must work on the supply side of things. And I'm sure that the Royal Government of Bhutan is aware of these things and is already trying to work on it and trying to tackle it. Having said that, let me once again repeat what I said earlier, that as of today, there is no rupee crunch or rupee crisis. I think there's enough rupees which are available in Bhutanese hands with the central bank, with the Royal Monetary Authority of Bhutan, and there is not much of an issue. But on the premium, you're absolutely right. It's a fact of life. We know that if we just cross the gate, we get a premium on rupees there. So we are trying to tackle both the short-term possibilities and the longer-term demand-supply possibilities.